Who's showing up tonight, Blue? Who's showing up?
For the New York Giants and their faithful begins in earnest here in East Rutherford.
Hey, another Sunday, another time to do what we do.
If you can't get ready to play this game, you ought to take a hike.
Believe, believe, believe.
I don't care how much you know about football. If you show me you can't hit, you don't belong here.
Sam's looking right. Complete to the ball down to the 35. Showing his feet to the 30. He's got 4 men in his back.
If you ain't ready to dominate, don't step on this field.
Want to throw that time by Manning?
It's a great day to be an NY Giant.
Deep downfield, makes the catch. The New York Giants with the most improbable win.
Welcome to episode number 4 of the Always a Giants podcast. Today we have a very special guest on the program from Big Blue Unbiased. Help me welcome Vincent Rapisardi. Vincent, thanks for taking the time.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's get right into it, Vincent. Tell us, for those of you that don't know about you at Big Blue Unbiased, what do you guys do over there? And tell us a little bit about it.
So basically I started the website about 4 years ago. The big thing that I wanted to accomplish with the site was that I wanted to be, just like the name says, unbiased. I wanted it to not be a fan blog because for so many years I had written for different fan blogs where it's very fan-oriented and kind of the same narratives. A lot of people want to kind of stick to the same narratives, maybe not look at the facts, look at the truth because they love a certain player or maybe they don't love a certain player or coach or whatever it might be. So the point of the website was to be in the middle and not be biased, not have an agenda, just kind of state the facts and be as honest as possible. And then I would say over the past last football season, it really started to move towards like analytics. So that was a big way to kind of stay in the middle, stay unbiased, and strictly use facts and not just what I think is good or who I think is a good player just because I watch them or just because I watch film. One thing that I've talked about many times on Twitter, I think film is important. Obviously, watching film is, there definitely shows the side of the game that helps coaches and anyone who watches the game evaluate a player and how they play and how they perform. But at the same time, people watch film differently, and there's certain things that someone may say about a player that is subjective, and they may think a player is good at this or good at that, and they may only base it on watching a certain amount of film, especially when it comes to college prospects. I mean, unless you watch every single game the college prospect has played, and if you watch one game and let's say you watch 20 plays, that isn't, completely indicative of how good that player is. You're only watching one game and 20 plays. So with analytics, it kind of gives more of a broad perspective. It takes away the bias. It's not subjective at all. It just tells you kind of what happens, again, in the most unbiased way possible.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with you. I mean, I like a lot of your takes because they're some of them are very non-conventional. You know what I mean? I think that's where you get your gripe with some people on Twitter with your takes is they're like you said, they're very unbiased, but you give them a different point of view that, they're not used to hearing. They're used to hearing the generic answer that everybody else gives, and you give something else. And I think that's where it draws a little tension. I've seen you, go back and forth with a couple people on Twitter about certain things, but at the end of the day, that's what it's about, having that general conversation with people and be able to find some common ground. And obviously all our common ground is we're all Giants fans. You know what I mean?
Of course, yeah. I mean, I think the thing that I want to encourage too is like having a good debate. I think that kind of gets lost on Twitter many times. Everyone just wants to name call and whatever. And again, when it comes to my content, I don't even mean for it to be controversial. I don't mean for it to be like, crazy and like totally different than everyone else. Honestly, I just want it to be, driven on facts. And sometimes, especially when it comes to fans, and look, I understand fans love their team. Like, of course they're going to be emotional about, if I say something about Eli Manning that isn't pro Eli Manning. It's just the facts are telling me that maybe he struggled with this or that. I understand that people are not going to like it, but at the same time, I want people to trust me. I want people to go to me and trust what I have to say, not just because I have a certain agenda, but because I'm just speaking facts.
Facts, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can agree with that 100%. I mean, because I would rather personally hear the facts, the analytics, than, just the people that are going out there and saying, oh, I like this guy because of this, that, and the third, and there's no substance behind why they like him or anything like that. So I appreciate all that you do. I really do. That's why I love to have you on.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. Let's hop right into it. First question for you: the 2020 draft. How would you grade the Giants on a letter grade, A through F, in the 2020 draft?
Yeah, so when it comes to the draft, I'm actually not a huge fan of making grades just because nobody's played any games, right? So I like to base it on, okay, positional value. Did they get value at positions that they needed? They did. Obviously, they added more to the offensive line. I like the pick of Holmes to add more help in the secondary. McKinney, another player in the secondary. I think it makes sense. They had more young players to the secondary, guys that you don't have to pay too much money. Obviously, they're on rookie contracts. And my thing with Gettleman when it comes to he's added a lot of young players, a lot of young defensive backs over the first 3 off seasons that he's had. And for me, I look at corners and I look at safeties, and it's one of those positions that defensive backs in general, it seems to it's very hit or miss. It's tough to find an elite level shutdown corner. So I feel like he's just kind of taking as many risks as possible, adding as many defensive backs as possible, and hoping one of them hits. And especially I look at like DeAndre Baker last year. He went back into the first round and he took DeAndre Baker. And my thing was maybe he wanted to do that because usually guys in the secondary, they take a little bit more time to develop as well. It seems like younger players in the secondary take a little more time to kind of get ready. And usually you don't see a corner step right in day one and become a shutdown corner. It just doesn't really happen too often. So maybe taking Baker in the first round last year, having that 5th-year option to get another year of development, another year on his contract. That's kind of something I look at. But as far as this draft, obviously they got Pert to add to their offensive line. So now you have guys that can potentially be your starting left tackle, starting right tackle moving forward. Adding some linebackers as well. So I think position-wise made sense. Obviously, the guys have to go out there and play. So we'll see how it goes.
Absolutely. I can't agree. I love the answer, too. Like, you can't give a grade. Most people, when I ask them that question, they throw a grade out there. They say A or B or whatever. And you make a good point. None of them have played an NFL game yet. So how could you really grade anything until maybe after the first year, even maybe after the first couple of years, you can fairly grade them after 2 years. But that was
exactly. Yeah, no, that's a big thing with draft classes too, and that's like one thing that people got on kind of the 2018 class this past season. Everyone was like, oh, Will Hernandez didn't take the next step. Lorenzo Carter didn't take the next step. Barkley was probably not as good of a player as he was in his rookie year. Statistically, he wasn't. So, but at the same time, it takes years for a draft class for it to truly grade it and say, okay, I worked out. If you look at Justin Tuck and Corey Webster, those guys were staples. Those guys were important players of championship-level teams. In their first couple of seasons in the NFL, they were relevant. I mean, multiple years, their first couple of years. And we're not talking about just one rookie season. We're talking about 2+ years of you didn't really know. You didn't really know how important of players that they were going to be, and then they turn into important players in championship runs.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. You actually touched on Matt Pert there a little briefly, so that was kind of going into my next question. I was going to ask you your favorite draft pick rounds 3 through 7. Who was your favorite pick out of those?
I would probably say Darnay Holmes, just because, again, it's one of those positions where I like what Gettleman's done. He continues to take risks and he continues to take more young defensive backs and just hopefully 1 or 2 or 3 hit. Maybe Sam Beal won't. Maybe Corey Ballantyne won't. Maybe even DeAndre Baker won't. But if Holmes, if McKinney, who knows? All of a sudden, you keep taking these guys, you keep taking these young defensive backs. You just hope that a couple become average or above average starters. So I would say Holmes is kind of the interesting pick there, especially if Baker we don't know what his future is right now. We don't know. We don't know what's going to happen moving forward. It's still kind of an interesting situation. So let's say he has to step up and he has to play. I mean, you obviously have James Bradbury starting at one corner, but maybe Holmes impresses in camp and he becomes the starter on the other side. I think a very interesting pick, kind of one of those underrated picks. A lot of people thought that he kind of fell a little bit further in the draft than many expected. So I would say he would be my favorite.
Okay. All right. I was going to say Matt Pert, actually, because, like, I talked about this on a couple different episodes here, like, and I said, like, he's so versatile. He plays so many different positions, and when it comes to who you dress on a Sunday, you're only dressing 2 additional offensive linemen, and 99% of the time those two play two different positions. So I feel like that's where Matt Pert's going to come in. He might not start right away on that line, but I feel like he's going to dress all 16 games if he's healthy, throughout the season.
Of course, yeah. I think that was definitely a pick that, a lot of people seem to be fans of so far. Again, we'll see how any of these draft picks go out and perform. But, definitely a lot of flexibility. Gives the Giants some options.
Right, absolutely. And here's the $1 million question I'm going to throw at you right now that everybody on Giants Twitter has been talking about ever since the draft. Should Andrew Thomas start at left tackle right away? Yes or no?
Yes, this has been a big question, a big debate. I personally, here's what I would do. I probably would not start him at left tackle. What I would do, you go into camp. I mean, if he unquestionably proves he's better than Nate Solder, right? It's not close. Let's just say he goes into camp, preseason, and he's just clearly better than Nate Solder. Then look, you make the choice and you go ahead and you start him. Personally, I wouldn't. I wouldn't start him at left tackle unless it's just completely obvious that he is so much better than Nate Solder. If it's, kind of a toss-up and Nate Solder's, at least an average left tackle and he's just showing that he can hold the job down, he's good, I'd keep Nate Solder at left tackle. I think a young player like Andrew Thomas is going into his rookie season with a ton of pressure. 4th overall pick in the draft. Already everyone's saying franchise left tackle. Next 10 years, he's going to be the left tackle of the future. That's a lot of pressure, okay? And not that he's not good enough. Maybe he is. Maybe he's ready to go. But for me, if I'm making a choice as a coach and Nate Solder is good enough to play left tackle, he's a competent average left tackle and he shows it in camp, I don't want to put pressure on Andrew Thomas, like a ridiculous amount of pressure as a rookie where if he has a bad game or two and he's giving up sacks left and right, not say that he would have a game where he gives up 3 or 4 sacks, but let's say he's struggling. I mean, that's a lot of pressure. Then what do? Now you slide him back over to right tackle, then you slide Nate Solder back to left tackle. Again, I went over this. I did like a YouTube video on it, the Nate Solder situation. A lot of the sacks had to do with Daniel Jones. Not that Nate Solder had a great year by any means. He definitely had his struggles. But do I think that he's a competent starting left tackle? Yeah, I just don't think that forcing Andrew Thomas to play left tackle in a season when, the Giants not going to win the Super Bowl this year. What's the point in forcing him to play left tackle? You have a veteran player. You start Andrew Thomas at right tackle. And when Andrew Thomas is ready, you play him at left tackle. It's interesting because the Giants obviously had a similar situation with Eric Flowers 5 years ago. Flowers was the 9th pick. Will Beatty got hurt. And then all of a sudden they were forced to play Eric Flowers at left tackle as a rookie, and that was obviously a disaster. Not that Andrew Thomas will be Eric Flowers. Obviously 2 different players. It's not fair to judge him that way. But why force it? Why force it? You have a veteran left tackle. Play in there. When Andrew Thomas is ready, move him over.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree with you 100%. Again, I was talking to somebody about this the other day. There's no reason to rush him, like you said. And, say you start him on the right side, he starts off on the right side of the offensive line, the season starts, and say the season just doesn't go the way that, some Giants fans are seeing it right now. And, they end up, they're 2-8 at some point. And then, you could see the switch. That's a viable switch at that point because obviously, you're not playing for anything at that point. And you can at least see what you got for next year. So that was my whole take on it, was to wait probably until they were out of contention and then maybe switch them over at that point.
Of course, and I had the same conversation. I compared it to Daniel Jones, right? Daniel Jones is the franchise quarterback. Andrew Thomas is being touted as the franchise left tackle. So why not treat him like a franchise player, just like you said? Move him over when it's ready. If they're 2-8 and it's just time to start playing young players, move him over and get him ready for his second season. And I think it's interesting. I know Dan Duggan of The Athletic put out an article about Tyron Smith in his rookie season playing right tackle. Not that Andrew Thomas has to play right tackle. Like I said, I think if it's clear that he needs to play left tackle day one and he's so much better than Nate Solder, then do it. But I don't see the rush. Whenever he's ready, move him over and treat him like a franchise player.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more on that. Here's another one. This is another question that's been going around Giants Twitter a lot. Who's going to be the Giants' breakout player on offense, you think, this year, besides Saquon Barkley, as obviously a given?
On offense, I would say Caden Smith. I know he kind of broke out last year. He showed some potential. I think that Evan Ingram should be moved more to a wide receiver role, which I think kind of opens up more opportunities for Caden Smith as a tight end. We also know that Jason Garrett kind of likes that multiple tight end, scenario situation. So I think that we'll see a lot of Caden Smith this year. He will be featured a lot in their offense, and he's a guy that they claimed off waivers. He's a guy that they added, that they didn't draft last year, that they wanted to draft, that they didn't. He was waived by the 49ers. And kind of an underrated move by Gettleman. Doesn't seem to get credit for that. The media doesn't seem to want to get credit for anything. But I think he's going to be an important part of the Giants' offense, especially with, let's say Evan Ingram is playing mostly at tight end. We've seen that he doesn't stay healthy. It's just he's injury prone at this point. He's been plagued by injury throughout his young career. So I think you'll see a lot of Caden Smith, and I think he will deliver from what we saw last year.
Absolutely. I agree with you 100%. I love Caden Smith. My breakout player, and I've been saying this all off season, I think it's going to be Darius Slayton. I really do. I loved what I saw out of Slayton last year. He really reminds me of Plax with that go up, get the ball mentality, throw it at the high point and go up there and get it. I really think he's going to have over 1,000 yards and 10 touchdowns next year. I really believe it because you saw him play with Eli and Daniel Jones, and you saw the same production with both quarterbacks and not as much ample practice time with Eli Manning, obviously, as Slayton was hurt in the beginning of the year when Eli was the starter. So I just found that interesting. I think Slayton's going to have a big year next year.
No doubt. Even if you look at last year, he averaged 15.4 yards per reception. He made big plays. He's a big play wide receiver, and that is huge in today's game. It's huge to be able to make plays downfield, especially in Jason Garrett's offense, that Air Coryell offense that likes to attack defenses down the field. I know Dak Prescott last year was among the league leaders in completed air yards or average intended air yards. He was throwing the football down the field. I think that's something Daniel Jones will be doing this year under Jason Garrett, and Darius Slayton's going to be an important part of that.
Absolutely. I wanted to touch on that too. How do you feel about the new coaching staff as a whole? Not just Joe Judge, not just Jason Garrett, as a cumulative whole. How do you think they can complement each other and make them better as a whole?
So I think the Joe Judge hire is interesting. It's obviously a change in direction. They went offensive coordinator with Ben McAdoo. They went offensive coordinator with Pat Shurmur. They went with two guys. Look, the reality of the situation, those two guys were hired simply based on Eli Manning. Those guys were hired to try and revive Eli Manning, to save Eli Manning. 2014, 2015, the offense had success with Ben McAdoo as offensive coordinator. So Ben McAdoo gets promoted to head coach in 2016. It's all about Eli Manning. They didn't want to lose Ben McAdoo. There's rumors of maybe the Eagles hiring him as head coach. They didn't want to lose him, so they hired Ben McAdoo. In the first year, obviously they won 11 games, mainly due to the defense. The defense was very good that year, second in fewest points allowed. Really good defense in 2016, but the offense wasn't very good. Eli struggled. They struggled in 2017. They bring in Pat Shurmur, one last chance to try and revive Eli. They draft Barkley. They signed Nate Solder. Obviously, that didn't help. They won 5 games. Nothing really changed. This hire is more about team guy, like old school Tom Collison football coach who's going to be a leader, not just a guy holding a clipboard, calling plays. So completely different direction. Jason Garrett, I think that's the best move they made all season, made all off season. I think what he brings to the Giants and what the Cowboys did offensively, one of the top teams offensively statistically, you bring that to the Giants. Again, downfield passing, important in today's game. I think that's kind of where Daniel Jones' game, where I think that he is, where it more suits his talent. He was among the league leaders up there in 20-plus yard touchdowns last year. I believe he had 9. So he had success throwing the football down the field. So I think that really plays to a strength, this offense, this Eric Coryell offense that Jason Garrett will bring to the Giants. Patrick Graham, we'll see. I mean, obviously he had nothing to work with. He had nothing to work with in Miami, so it's tough to really judge the guy on statistics last year when he was given, no talent. There's nothing there. Obviously, there's a connection with Joe Judge, so we'll see. We'll see if that there was a lot of hires that were made based on connections with the Giants. A lot of hires, position coaches, offense, defense coordinator. I mean, even Jason Garrett obviously had an Alabama connection with Nick Saban. So a lot of different connections. Patrick Graham, he's given some interesting pieces. They obviously signed Blake Martinez, James Bradbury. They get Xavier McKinney in there. So we'll see what happens.
Absolutely, yeah, I'm excited about that too. In the beginning, I wasn't all too hyped on bringing Jason Garrett in because they were talking about bringing him in as the head coach. I didn't want to see him in that capacity, and when they brought him in the offensive coordinator, I knew Dallas has had top 10 offenses the last 3 years. So, I feel like with with Barkley and Jones, I feel like there's a ton of upside that can potentially come out of this, and I'm excited to see how it pans out when we finally get the football season started.
Of course, yeah. I think there's some interesting components to this whole coaching staff. Even Brett Bielema. I think there's really Freddie Kitchen, some interesting additions. A lot of connection-based hires.
Absolutely. All right, let's get into the not-so-great news. This actually came out a little bit earlier today. This was from TMZ. According to TMZ, there are now 2 witnesses on the record saying DeAndre Baker never pulled a firearm out during the cookout. Now, this is a turn of events, obviously, of anybody that's been following since, this took place. Obviously, DeAndre Baker was at a cookout from what everybody was saying. He pulled the gun after losing some sort of, dice game or something like that. And that's what the consensus was. And, he was getting destroyed on Giants Twitter right after that happened. Everybody cut him, get rid of him. And then maybe after the first appearance hearing, they started to hear, the other side of the story, more or less. What do you think, and what do you think is going to happen if and when DeAndre Baker returns to the New York Giants?
I think it's going to be interesting how this whole thing unfolds, what ultimately happens, what the ultimate decision is. They're in a tough situation because, the Giants have really been about character. They've made decisions based on character. You saw, Janoris Jenkins get released and waived in late December because of a tweet, right? You saw Odell Beckham get traded because many considered him a locker room distraction. So if you're setting the standard that you're getting rid of talented football players based on being a distraction, not being good locker room guys, or whatever it might be, what do you do with DeAndre Baker? We still got to see how this whole thing unfolds, what the ultimate decision is. What will the NFL do? Will the NFL suspend him? Is it a violation of kind of the conduct situation that they have, the conduct rules that they have, the player conduct rules? I don't know. So I think we still have to kind of wait and see what happens. If any of it is true, if he does get in trouble for something, again, the Giants are in a tough situation because you're setting this standard that you're all about team first, and anyone, who isn't all in on the team and does things outside that are kind of gaining headlines for the wrong reasons, they're moving on from. So I don't know. I when you set that standard, now you kind of put yourself in a tough situation with DeAndre Baker. If any of it is true, then what do? Do you keep him and make an exception because you drafted him in the first round and he was your draft pick, Dave Gettleman? I don't know. I think that might look bad to the rest of the team that there's exceptions made because that was Dave Gettleman's guy.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that too. But now you go to the flip side of the coin with Aldrich Rojas, right? All right. So he gets involved in this hit and run last weekend. He tries to flee the scene. The truck gets disabled. He tries to get out, run barefoot, and, eventually he did surrender to police. But I said it the day that it happened, and it's not a good look for Rosas at all. Just no matter how you look at it, he's doing 100 miles an hour. no care for the people around him or anything else, and then trying to flee on top of it, and now come to find out alcohol might be involved, and this would make it his second DUI, one in college, one now. Do you think this is we saw the last of Aldrich Rojas wearing Giants blue?
Well, this is one of the situations where, because he's a kicker, and because you don't have to pay him, he's not getting paid big money you can get out of his contract. I think ultimately he does get released. I think they move on from him. Obviously, they have to be professional and wait for everything to play out. Obviously, does not sound good, does not look good so far. But again, I think they kind of have to wait it out, be like, okay, we have to wait for the facts and everything just to make sure that everything is true and not overreact, because we've seen that in the past, where teams just kind of move on from a player and it's not true. I remember a player, Whitehead from the Cowboys a few years ago, I think was in trouble for something, allegedly, and then it turned out not to be true. It's something along the lines of that. So I think the Giants are kind of waiting it out to see what happens. But ultimately, I think that if it is true, I think he's gone. I think they have to move on. And they had a situation years ago with Josh Brown, and obviously it's a little bit different there. It was a domestic violence situation, so obviously the NFL was dealing with a lot of domestic violence heat. That was around the Ray Rice situation. So, and they didn't move on. They actually had re-signed Josh Brown. They kept him on the team. They knew about his past. They knew about the situation. And they also knew what the NFL was going through with Ray Rice, and they still decided to keep him. And it was a terrible move. It was a terrible PR move. I didn't understand it when it happened. I still don't get it now. I think eventually Aldrich Rojas will be released.
Yeah, I agree with you on that, too. I think Aldrich Rojas played his last game in Giants blue. And then again, last year, he didn't have a great year anyway. So I was looking at the free agent kickers list. Who do you think off of that list would be a good fit for the Giants, or even just a good fit to bring in for tryouts?
I believe Stephen Gostkowski is kind of the name that people are talking about and mentioning. And I would say, obviously, he has a Patriots connection, which seems to be, again, the Giants are making a lot of moves, both in free agency and on the coaching staff side, connection-based. It's like LinkedIn of the NFL. They're just, they're adding people left and right, networking, and I just think that Gostkowski kind of seems to make the most sense at the moment. But we'll see. I mean, there might be a young kicker out there that nobody really knows about that may prove himself in camp. So I think that's kind of the fun part of preseason. That's the fun part of training camp, guys that earn their way throughout the process.
Absolutely. All right, Vincent, I got one final question for you. I want your prediction on the 2020 season. What do you think the Giants are going to finish this year?
I would say 7-9. That's kind of the area, and I think people should. I know that it's not going to sound right, but I think people should celebrate it. And I think what's going to happen across, over the course of the years, people are going to get frustrated because I don't think they're going to win that many games. I don't think they're really going to be a competitive football team, a playoff contending team. I think they'll finish around 6 or 7 games with the final win total, as we've seen. Even in 2018, they started off 1-7, and towards the end of the year, they won their fair share of games against easy opponents and backup quarterbacks. I think you'll kind of see that this year. They'll win around 6 or 7 games, but I think it kind of should be celebrated as part of the process. I mean, they're not a win-now team, and that needs to be understood. And that's something that, I feel like people needed to understand last year. Everyone was getting frustrated, all the losses. I'm like, what did you expect? They're a rebuilding team. They didn't do anything last offseason on purpose. They were rebuilding. So they weren't going to win games. They didn't have enough talent. You had a young quarterback, a rookie quarterback, with injuries all over the offense. So I think that's kind of the mindset. I think fans should have an open-minded, okay, maybe they can somewhat compete a little bit and at least be interesting. Not going to win a lot of games, but at least be interesting. But understand that losses are going to happen. They're not a win-now team. They're still kind of the next phase of rebuilding. I wouldn't say they're a rebuilding team. They're kind of they're moving forward into that next wave of competitiveness.
Right. Yeah. Absolutely. I kind of got them on a high end and a low end. My low end was 6-10. My high end was 9-7. Hoping they can squeak out a couple wins against teams people don't think they're actually going to beat. But, we'll find out. Vincent, I want to thank you so much for coming on with me today. I really appreciate it, guys. Go check out Big Blue Unbiased. You can also follow him on Twitter at Vince Rapisardi. So make sure you follow him. Go check out Big Blue Unbiased. And Vince, thank you so much for coming on with me, man. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
In the final game of the 2004 season, Big Blue was looking to end an 8-game losing streak as they faced the Cowboys at Giants Stadium. With Dallas leading 24-21 late in the fourth quarter, the Giants' young quarterback, Eli Manning, would come of age.
Steps up, checks off the Barber underneath, up to the 40, 45 midfield, into Cowboy territory and tackled at the 44-yard line.
The Giants needed a touchdown to win the game, and they would have to march 66 yards to get it.
16 seconds to go. Manning calling signal. Now checks off at the line. First and goal at the 3. Manning takes the snap, drops back, gives for Barber, running left, touchdown Giants! Barber from 3 yards out with 11 seconds to go. The losing streak is over, and the Giants end 2004 on a winning note. More importantly, Eli Manning comes of age with a game-winning drive in the final minute 30, and the Giants win it 28-24.
Eli, your first NFL win, what's that feel like?
It's just special, especially the way we did it. Had a 2-minute drive at the end, and Tiki, we handed the ball off to him, hit on the screen. It's pretty much his drive the whole way down, but it's just a great feeling to get that first win.